Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 245 of Retropower and Den. It's quite a lot of episodes, and I'm here in my scruffs because I'm doing a lot of grinding, which we'll come on to in a minute. And it is flipping warm, so it might be shorts this afternoon, I think. I'm getting grinder burnt legs. Anyway, we're going to start on more interesting things than that with the V12 E-Type, which Scott is busily exhaust fabricating on, and he's making pretty good progress. We have had various trials and tribulations and mountains to climb on this, but he is climbing them. To put the full picture around it, which we've probably done before, but we'll do it again, an E-Type is quite a tricky place to get an exhaust run underneath and maintain ground clearance. Now that is normally solved by the fact that E-Types have a ride height that is very, very high. However, we'd like to run a little bit lower than a normal sort of E-Type ride height, not too much, but just they do look a bit teetery normally. So we'd like to, certainly all of the planning that's gone in was running a little bit of a lower ride height. To do that, we've got to get the exhaust quite tight. But we also have what will be a 6.8 litre V12, which will be quite shouty and will need to be kept reasonably quiet to make the car comfortable to use. You know, it's not a racing car, it's a long distance cruise, it's a cruising weekend car. Its owner doesn't want to be rendered deaf, and his wife definitely doesn't want to be rendered deaf. So we're trying to get a reasonable amount of silencing and ground clearance into an E-Type, where one of the modifications has been to get more seat space, and to get more seat space into an E-Type we need to eat into the floor space and drop things down into the floor a little bit, which we have done. Consequently, lots of things fighting each other. We had various solutions to that. The solution we've chosen is one where, you know, a reasonably cost-effective but still quite tricky and still quite time-consuming option, which is to modify some silencers that are effectively an off-the-shelf silencer, but then modify. Those are from Birchall's exhausts, but then they have been modified to get us some more clearance by notching the tops out. So you'll be able to see on some B-roll, undoubtedly, where Scott has now cut sections into those boxes, and because the packing in those boxes hasn't melted its binder, I forget what the binder's made of now, polypropylene I think it is, but the fiberglass inside the silencer is bound together, the wadding is bound together with a polypropylene yarn, which when the exhaust gets hot, when you first run the engine at temperature and the exhaust heats up, it melts that yarn, that releases all of the fiberglass wadding to expand into the box. Because they've not got hot yet, all the wadding's pulled in nice and tight, which means Scott could notch out the boxes, get covered in itchy fiberglass, but notch out the boxes without losing any great amount of the wadding, and then weld in some recesses into the casings of those silencers, which then give us clearance on the electric handbrake mechanism and clearance on the floor pans. And we've also got to put some heat shielding in there as well, which makes the clearance issues even greater. However, we can fit all that in. It will fit, and it will work. It's just been extremely difficult, extremely tight. And interestingly, I was having a conversation with Scott earlier regarding the bends needed, because we've got a lot of the bends, but we're likely to need some more. And to put it in perspective, when we're running a 4-pipe system like this with 1 3/4 pipes, I believe he will have used 24 1 3/4 bends so far, or will have done once he's got the pipes in and out of those silencers, and we will probably need some more to do the back. That puts in perspective the sheer amount of welding. I did a little calculation earlier, which is just on the bends he's used so far, when they're all fully welded, I think there'll be somewhere in the region of just a bit over 5 meters of continuous TIG weld, just going round all of those bends. To put it in perspective, there's quite a lot of time involved in this job. But yeah, he's got the pipes all level and cleared around the gearbox and in the positions they need to be in to clear things like the shifter cable, the floor, the torsion bar mounts, and everything else he's got to clear at the front. They're now aimed rearward. They've then got to be directed back in and swept into the inlets of these boxes, then swept out of the outlets of those boxes, underneath the diff carrier and up into the rear set of silencers, and then up to the tailpipes under the boot. But he's making very good progress. We're getting there on this. As I say, modifying the boxes is not the work of 5 minutes. That is eating a bit of time, but it is coming together very nicely, and he's doing a beautiful job of the welding. So yeah, more to come next week on this, and hopefully he'll be getting most of the way through this, I would say, next week. But it is quite a tricky job on a modified E-Type. It's a fairly tricky job on a standard E-Type, even trickier when it's modified. So yeah, it has its challenges. Moving on from that, onto the Saab. I'm going to hand over to Bobby on the Saab, because Bobby is A, best placed to explain the work he's been doing, and B, I'm quite liking the fact there's a bit of a break in me talking in this video, because I do understand a few people, we see it occasionally, less so these days, but see it occasionally in the comments that I don't want to see Cal and Nat talking, we want to see some work being done. I get that. There's a reason why we don't just show all the work being done. That's that Jamie can't be in, well, let's say 20 places at once, so he can't catch all of the work. He places his cameras to capture some time lapse. He gets out in the workshop covering what he can, but he can't cover everything. So we try and get the right blend of work and me talking, but it'd be nice to have some other people talking as well. And Bobby's very good at that, so I'm going to let Bobby talk you through what he's doing on the Saab.
Hello everyone, welcome back from the metal shop, no body shop. Right, so fast forward from last week, I buttoned up all the scuttle panel and the inner A pillars and all that. James got a nice footage of me spot welding and plug welding the panel, connecting the door, the bottom of the windscreen to the bulkhead. I had a bit tricky brackets to make here, where these were the last two mounting points for the wiper mechanism to to triangulate it and keep it in place. So originally it was something like this on the Saab. Obviously we lost all the brackets once we cut the Saab bulkhead. But yeah, so had to fabricate these ones as well. So now everything is rock solid. It stays where it should. So I would say this is 100% done. 99% done, because I slipped out of my mind. I forgot that I had this link rod just prototyped very roughly, and I used the Audi's linkages, so I chopped off the ends and did a prototype. But then for the actual linkage, the ends that I used, they were already used and buttered and all that, so we bought a new linkage so I can chop the ends, make a nice full length linkage without welds and all that. So I've been doing that today in the morning. And again, the tricky bit is you have to be very precise with the length of this, because the motor is fixed with the crank length, and then you have a specific ratio between the motor crank and the wiper arm cranks, and because they're not connected together as a mechanism, the motor is bolted to the chassis, and then separately the wiper mechanism is bolted. And if this linkage is not exact, what is going to happen is the motor will push that past the wiper arm crank movement, and it will try to flex them or twist them or eventually break them at the time. Yeah, so that's done. The A pillars, as I mentioned a minute ago, the A pillars inners, sort of a kick panel as well, they're all connected now to the outer A pillars and all boxed up. So that's all that is all done. I fit again the HVAC unit and the cross member under the dash, just to make sure that nothing moved or I lock myself when I put the A pillars and all that. So that's done as well. I put the seats. The Audi came with fully electric seats. I think we're going to use, we bought a set because of the rear seats we were missing from the Audi. We bought a set of the front and rear seats, and the front seats on these ones are manual, which we might end up using that. Anyway, so I just fit the seat just to make sure that it fits, because the way the Saab flange is stepping in the Audi, we were worried that we might not have enough clearance here, but we've got a good inch clearance here, so that's perfect. And the rest obviously is all Audi, so it's all that is the same. Again, I just literally just throw on the rear seats as well, just to see how they look. Lower is fine. The uppers, because the the body is sunk into the chassis based on our design. If you look at the rear seat looks a bit too high, so we might end up actually having to shorten the backs of the rear seats eventually. It's just as a proportion, it looks off a little bit, but literally I just put them 5 minutes ago. So that's where we are currently, and and also a big mental step up was cutting all the brakes on the interior. It's been forever since they were there, and I've been climbing in and out around them and all that. So it's good to see car coming back to looking as a car again. Yeah. So I think that's would be for today, and I'll see you next week.
Right, well thank you Bobby. And moving on from that, we're going to reverse up this way past my autograss car that I'm not working on because I've been moving house. However, in the new house I am going to be getting back on with it soon. We're going to pause by the BMW just to say that we're not doing anything on the BMW because Stu has been on holiday, but Stu is back. Stu's back in the area, not in work, but he is back in the Midlands again now, and he will be back working in earnest on the BMW again on Monday. So you'll be able to get another slice of Stu magic on the BMW next week. But as I say, he's currently still on holiday, but back in the Midlands. I've been doing a bit of work on the Scimitar TVR Sportmotive E chassis, doing the modifications that we talked about previously, which have involved quite a lot of fairly delicate work, doing the cutting out and notching and welding back in. But I'm happy with how that's gone. The front sections are now modified. The eagle-eyed will undoubtedly pull up in the comments that this tube isn't fully welded. No, it's not fully welded because I need to take these 2 box sections out to be able to fully weld that, and at the moment I don't want to take those box sections out. When I do, these 2 welds will be completed, and then that is all fully welded. And then on this side I've now moved the lower chassis tube inboard, cut off all the bracing. I've put the centre tube back in there. I still need to put the diagonals in, but what I'm going to do is move on to the other side now, get the other side to the same stage this one's at, and then put the diagonals in last because they're all a very similar job, and it won't need the diagonals to avoid the chassis moving anywhere, so that's fine. I've actually welded the chassis down to the bench in a couple of places just to stop the lower chassis tubes moving while I'm doing all this. The clamps are very good, but actually just for peace of mind and to make sure nothing catches me out and we can't get any tubes moving in the clamps, I've actually just welded it down, tack welded it down to the bench, and then we'll just grind that back off afterwards. Just guarantees that nothing can move and slide in the clamps, or that if I start hammering things, which I've had to do in a couple of places, it won't knock the chassis around in the clamps and move things and alter my datums. The new lower tube section is all made up, mitered, welded into place. That tube's welded onto it. I say I've just got to put the diagonal braces in. On the other side I've then got to cut out all the same part. It's a fairly large piece of bracing that has to be removed, but that's all been removed, and as I say, new bits welded in, and then I'm going to remake the diagonals and get all that put back together, and that will be the modification to allow us room for the Recaro seats that are going into this car, and to allow us room for the clutch pedal. They're the 2 things. This tube was very tight on the pedals here, and the seat was very tight in this area here, so that alleviates those 2 problems without completely destroying the integrity of the chassis. As I say, we will have reduced the torsional rigidity a little in this area by the narrowing. I've narrowed that 30mm each side, or will be once that's done. However, we're going to regain a chunk of that because we're going to actually structurally box in that part of the chassis. There are a few complications I need to iron out on how we're going to install the prop shaft and things like that, but not unlike an E-Type, that area is boxed in on an E-Type for the same reason, to increase the torsional rigidity in an area where the chassis is quite narrow, doesn't really have the cross-sectional area, the material away from the neutral axis. Going off on engineering terms, I'm not going to go off on a big tangent because I know Jamie wants to try and keep the video to a reasonably sensible length, but to the slightly non-engineers here, it's fairly sensible. Something is more torsionally stiff, stronger in inverted commas, the further you move the material that makes up that thing away from the middle of the thing. It's fairly sensible. You know, if you get a piece of steel that's a solid round bar and try and twist it, it twists fairly easily. If you move the same amount of material as was used in the round bar into a piece of tube, it's much stiffer torsionally. Same here. We've moved material towards the neutral axis, which means that the chassis will be less stiff. To compensate for that, we're going to add some more material at that closer distance around the neutral axis to gain that back. It's not the most weight efficient way of doing it, but it will gain that structure back. And whilst we don't want to build a heavy car, I don't think weight's going to be the biggest issue on this one, and we do need to fit a driver in and have him able to adjust his seat. So compromise, which is all what building cars is about, finding the compromises and herding the compromises into the right places so you can actually get a good end result. I'm going to stop talking about that now to try and keep the video to a reasonable length and not have too many tangents. And we're going to move on to Project Brenner, as it is called, the Aston Martin DBS Restomod. And on this, Matt has been fabricating, getting very gritty and very weldy in the back of that. And we now have the complete rear seat area welded in place. The rear seat squab area, he's bead-rolled the sections in that, got all of that welded into place. I think you saw on the previous episode that he'd got the section for the prop shaft to clear in the rear chassis cross member. He'd got all that made and fabricated, so that's all in place. We've got prop shaft clearance. And we've just been working on some pieces to do the rear chassis rails. In fact, you wait there, Jamie, I'm going to go and fetch a piece to show to camera on that, which is a little bit we did in CAD because it was a bit awkward to work out a flat pattern for. These sections, which are the cappings, which will transition the 120 by 60 mm box section main frame rails, which pick up all the rear suspension components, into some 75 by 50 mm section rails that are going to come off on an angle behind the rear wheels, go outboard, and then pick up each end of the rear panel, what would have been the hollow section that originally mounted the rear bumper, which also carries the back of the boot floor. And we needed to make an angled transition in 2 angles, that way, and a transition between 2 different sizes of box section, and make it all look neat. That's where a bit of CAD comes in quite handy. You can draw that up in CAD, work out the folds on it, and then flat pattern it into a piece like that. That is that. Now, the wise will notice that you can't fold that into that, and that's exactly correct. That and that make up the split line that is there. And then I said to Matt, what we want to do is work out where to put the other split line during a trial fold, and then work that out, and then just bandsaw that other split line into this, because if I do it in CAD, it'll be in the one place where we can't get that in the folder, and I don't know, because we don't have the CAD cam to work out with all of our folding kit exactly where I've got clearance. Said to Matt, it'd be better off just cutting the other split line into this, and also it's easier to work out the fold routine on that than it is on the 2 halves. I'm not going to try and explain that any better than that, but basically Matt figured actually the best place is in the middle, so he's just split that straight through the middle of there, which is through the middle of there, folded that, and that's all worked out quite nicely. So that is that, and Matt actually got that bang on first time, which I was quite impressed with, because I don't think I would have done. He actually got that folded bang on first time. So the next phase of that is to just sand in the little deviations on the faces of it from where it's been folded, and then they can be welded in, and then he can make the rails that come from that out and then up, and they'll pick up the rear cross panel, if you like, the rear panel of the car, which will then carry the boot floor, spare wheel, anything else that's going in the boot, and enable us to mount the bumper and also mount everything else that's got to be mounted in that area to the back of the car. So that's what's going on there. We need another piece from ASR, mentioning them again, Sean and Claire at ASR Motorbody Engineering in Irchester. They have a inner rear panel, the steel rear panel, which is the inner rear panel on one of these. They have one of those for us. It's actually from a V8 car, which is very subtly different, that they were planning to point out. That doesn't really affect us with this, because it'll fit just the same, because we're fitting it to bits that aren't standard Aston. But as I mentioned before, I wanted a standard length, known fitting panel to put on this, because this one's been butchered in the past, and I don't actually know what the correct width across the rear chair legs, if you like, that hold that rear panel in place. I don't know what the correct width is across those. I'd like a new virgin unmolested panel to put in to check that that's all correct. And then the next phase from then, we've also done a little bit of messing about with this earlier in the week, is trial fitting in loosest possible terms. We've put a plywood dummy floor in the car. and then we've thrown we're using some Jaguar XJ40 seats as our seat start points. They're good for a number of reasons. The downside is they're very, very heavy, but so are the original seats. The upside is they're incredibly comfortable. The foams are really well designed in them. The diaphragms in the bottom are really good for seat support, and the electric mechanisms in them are very old-fashioned, but they kind of stand the right, they tread just the right line, basically. They're modern enough to still work and be well designed, but they're old enough that they're just simple wire controls to normal DC motors. There's nothing clever with them. So we can control them very easily with any switchgear or any controls we want through our PDU, but they're modern enough that they are in one piece, intact, not rusty, still serviceable, etc. So we've offered one of those in, which works. We can get it in the right place, so we've now got to develop the shape for the floor pan to be able to mount that in the correct position, and we need to also mock up a pedal position to make sure that we've got the driving position absolutely spot on before we start developing any more of the interior design. So that's where we're at on that. So lots more welding and grinding and quite a lot more design. Moving on from that very briefly, we'll cover the body shop, where peering in through the windows right now, Gaz is painting a Lexus IS300, which actually belongs to one of our other customers. And it's not a sort of project we would normally take on, but basically its owner, I don't know if this has been mentioned in the Den previously, I don't know if this has been mentioned or not. If it hasn't, it's kind of come in as a Den project, but it also wanted a repaint, basically, freshen it all up, a new windscreen, which is conveniently part of the repaint job anyway. And its owner basically just wanted a nice IS300 to use as a utility car, basically doing tip runs, taking when he needs to take some luggage to places, basically just doing his errands. That type of car. Didn't really want anything modern. Has had IS300s before and liked them. Just wanted an IS300, but fresh, modern, all new running gear, new suspension components, all the new parts under it to make it drive like a new one, and with fresh paintwork to make it look like a new one, which is something we can do. We can facilitate that. So that's what's being painted right now. Gaz is just fighting a little bit of a battle with temperature. We knew it was going to be touch and go, this one, and he is right on the limits of the upper temperatures that we're going to be able to paint at. Obviously in the UK we don't generally need air conditioning on a paint booth. With the temperatures as they are at the minute, the air intake temperature coming off the roof of our building is about 32 degrees C, which is the upper limits of what we ought to be painting at, and we are just treading that line. We're just the right side of the line, but if it goes up more than a handful of degrees more, we're going to be pushing things too far. So he is treading a tightrope at the moment with the time to get the car finished versus the time that the temperature is going to be going up outside. But I think we're just about treading that time, like that tightrope, correctly at the moment. So he's done one batch of the smaller parts of the car, the bumpers, etc. He's now getting the main body shell painted, and then he's got another batch of small components, rubbing strips, side strips, mirror covers, various other things still to paint. And then that'll be pretty much there. That'll be an IS300 resplendent in its original factory colour, which I forgot the name of, but all brand new, which will be very nice. On that note, I think it's time to hand over to Cal, let him take you through next door and see what's going on in the assembly shop, and probably a visit down to the Den as well. Or I will just say I am on holiday next week, so you won't see me next week. I'll see you the week after.
Thank you very much, Nathaniel, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the assembly shop for another weekly tour. I'm going to start with the Interceptor, which actually there's been quite a lot going on this in various areas. I think actually I was going to say the cooler pack's gone in, but I think that might have been in last time we had a look around this. But the engine bay started to be populated in general, particularly down in this area. So we've got the master cylinder and servo. Now we actually didn't have a reservoir with this master cylinder. Originally these had like remote mounted reservoirs, and we really wanted to have an integrated reservoir that looked half decent but also accounted for the angle of the cylinder. Bit of research, and we found Wilwood did a really nice kind of pair of reservoirs that are matched together at a certain angle, which we figured, although that angle wasn't listed, it eyeballed us about right, which turned out to be exactly right. Now they actually need a method of holding them in. They have like cross pins through them. So we've made some really cool brackets that basically tie the two reservoirs together and anchor them down to the actual cylinder itself. So it kind of looks almost like that's a factory installation, which is always what we're aiming for. Servo pipe's gone in, so we've got a little aluminium hard line for the servo, which will eventually connect to the vacuum on the back of the manifold on the engine. We've just loosely fitted the ECU cover, so this section at the top here, which kind of almost mates up with the front of the servo, sits over the pedal box area. That is to cover the factory Mopar ECU that we're using on this, because this is, let's not forget, a crate Hemi, which you can see on the table over there. I'll talk about that in a minute. And they come with basically a factory mapped ECU, which we are using. And then we are, although the package only comes as a manual, we're using the 8 HP 8-speed auto transmission that would have been fitted to that engine in an automatic Dodge Charger. But we're having to use a standalone transmission controller, which we're using from a company called Sound German Engineering, which will interface with the CAN signal on the factory Mopar ECU to get the information it needs for the transmission controlling. So that's that. Steering column's all in now. I think it was probably last time. Quite a lot going in, populating the under wing area here now as well. So Steve put the indicators in the other day. Just starting to get things that we've got on the shelf bolted to the car. We've got this radiator expansion tank in place here now, which sits really neatly around this 3D printed duct that we did. So that duct feeds cold air from the front through the inner wing and over to what will be the air filter casing for the engine. And then we've done this fabricated tank, which is kind of just sits around it here, which is for the coolant expansion overflow. So we run a system on these where the radiator's full completely to the top. I always refer to it as the Japanese cooling system. There's a fill port we've done on the top hose, but you completely fill that, and then when the coolant expands, it basically pops the pressure cap, then comes out of the hose on the sort of what you'd perhaps term the overflow normally, and down to that tank down there into the bottom of the tank. And that way, when the cooling system cools again, because the pressure cap has a one-way valve in it, it sucks the coolant back out of that tank again into the system. So it's just a neat way of kind of having a coolant expansion space without having to have the tank actually on show somewhere. And then we've got tabs here that hold a plastic arch liner, which actually Gibbo has been making over the last few weeks with a seal around it to stop all the road crap kicking up on there. And then also under there, we got back a load of the powder coat parts, so the lower wishbones were amongst those bits. George was getting those wishbones trial fitted on there, getting all the caster shims that Bobby made when we were doing the metalwork on it in place, and they had written on them where they were for. But because we're getting them Xylan coated as their final finish, we would lose that information. So we basically got everything trial fitted up, make sure they all worked as they should, and then stamped in numbers for them so we know what positions they go in and on what side they go on. And then those spaces have now gone away to be Xylan coated. So yeah, it's kind of chipping away. We've got the rear beam back from powder coat now as well. We're just waiting for the diff to be built up by Hauser Racing. As soon as we've got that back, I think actually we'll be in a position to get all the suspension in the car once those shims are back. What else will be on? I think George at the minute is working on the hard line for the AC. So we've got a lot of the AC system in here now. Condenser's actually part of the radiator pack. We've got the plumbing that sits under here all done. And then one of the hoses comes back over to the other side, and then a hard line runs up under the inner arch to the vintage air unit. So George is just making that hard line at the minute. Steve's run the battery cable, so that runs all the way through from the battery location down there. We're using an ECU Master battery isolator, which we've been using on a few projects. Quite nice because it adds a few functionality things into the car. One is just overall current protection, so if you have a massive short out of the battery cable, it just cuts the feed. Two, it provides an overall current draw number, which you can to the ECU via the CAN bus system to the ECU and the PDM. So basically, when you're connected up to the ECU Master, ECU or PDM, you can see what the overall current draw on the system is from right next to the battery. Also, we can program in what's the word? Basically impact protection. I can't think of what a G meter is essentially. So if the car is involved in an accident, it will cut all battery power as well. So nice and neatly done. Routes through in the inner wing area, through that little tube down that's sort of at the front of the rear seat base, and then along here, which will be under the centre console eventually, to the pass-through stud on the bulkhead. which is where the power will be distributed out on the inside to the 2 PDMs, and on the engine bay side that will branch out to the starter and alternator. So yeah, it's quite a lot of irons in the fire on this. All of the stainless and chrome work, we finished doing the trial build of that last week, and that's all gone to Derby plating now to be re-chromed, along with actually all of the stuff for copper plating on Churchill, but I'll come on back onto Churchill in a minute. In the meantime, engine for Interceptor. So because this car had been somewhere else before us, though this is a new engine, it was very dirty, but it also got various bits of overspray and things on it. I don't really know how or why, but we decided to repaint the block. We'd already taken all of the castings off, all the water pump housing, all the timing chain housing, etc., to re-bead blast those and make sure they were sealed correctly when they were fitted. So we're going to bead blast them, clear Cerakote them, and then obviously refit them, making sure the sealing's 100% correct. And while it was stripped, we thought we might as well just go one step further and repaint the block. So we've repainted that, gone for the famous Mopar Hemi Orange, I think it's called. Had to be, really. That's the colour they come in, and it's such an iconic colour for a Hemi. So that's where we're at with that, and then they've been doing some surface finishing on a few other bits. So the crank pulley's been painted. We noticed that the pulley on the power steering pump was bent, so that's been replaced with a new one. So all of these things are going to come together once we've Cerakoted all the castings, and everything can go onto this. Hopefully that will coincide with the transmission completing its rebuild and getting all the subframe parts back, and everything going into the car in reasonably quick sequence. Churchill, few areas of attack on this. We got the fuel filler neck back from Xylan, so that's been fitted for the final time by Toby. And actually, I don't think we even mentioned last week that we have a fully functioning assembly team again, in that we now welcome into the team Toby Paris, who is actually a friend of George Sinclair's, and although it's only his first week, I think, or second week, so far, exceptionally good addition to the team. So comment down below, welcome to the team, Toby, or good luck, Toby. Welcome to the madhouse. Right, so yeah, that's done, on for the final time. He's been looking at the transmission cooler plumbing. So originally there was a loose plan to run flexible lines down the off side of the engine. Looking at it when we were going to install those, we weren't happy with the routing being very close to the exhaust manifold and it being very difficult to anchor to the engine. So we did a revised plan to do them on the near side of the engine, which he's been executing. So those transmission cooler lines are going in now. He's now looking at the shift position sensor on the gearbox. So for the actual indication to tell you what gear you're in, we're using a system from Dakota Digital, which is basically just a potentiometer mounted on a little bracket where the crank that the shift cable attaches to is, with a little link rod between the two, and you program in, when you're in each gear, you program the display unit to recognise that resistance at that point, so it can tell you what gear you're in. And there'll be a little display down by the shifter eventually which will tell you what gear you've selected, and it has a couple of other useful features as well. You can actually, it has a reverse light output and a neutral safety switch built into it, which is quite useful actually, because although you can get those things from the shifter stick itself, if the cable comes out of adjustment, of course, the stick position might be different to the transmission position. So we probably will use those. I might even use both and cross-reference them, because we've got the PDM system on this. I can do an output from the Dakota Digital, which is effectively a neutral safety input to the PDM. And likewise, I could do the same off the shifter, and essentially the programming in the PDM will just be looking for those signals or a lack of those signals, and if it doesn't get that signal to say it's in neutral, it will prohibit the start circuit from activating. It's just one of the many useful things about running PDM electrics, that you can introduce these things with no additional effort because the system's already there to do it. It's just a bit of time programming the logic in there. So that's that. As I just said, the first batch of components for copper plate have all gone away now, so we're very, very excited to see those back. And Luke will no doubt mention that he is furiously 3D printing remaining interior parts for this at the minute. So we've just got this huge queue of 3D print stuff, which never seems to get smaller, but we should very shortly have all of the door card components. Oh, and also, nearly forgot, the HVAC, so the Vintage Air heating, ventilation, aircon unit is going to be going in for the final time. Toby has been making the spigot that mates the air feed that comes through the bulkhead to the actual fan intake on that. That was one of the remaining jobs we had to do on that. So he's making that, which when you fit the unit in place will just butt up with a seal against the bulkhead, so you get a cold air feed, which we had always planned, which goes through a 3D printed intake in the inner wing to the right hand, one of the little intake bezels at the front. So you basically get cold air feed to the HVAC unit right from the front of the car. And he's also doing the refrigerant lines and the heater pipes that are actually on the inside the car side, so that can go in for the final time, and that'll kind of then allow build up of remaining dash around it. So that's where we're at with that. Allegro, couple of areas of attack on this. We've got it on the ramp because we were doing the caster spaces to get the geometry where we want it on the front end. There was something else which I had in my head which has now completely fallen out of my head. What I will mention though actually is something which I don't think we mentioned the other week, which is these 3D printed intakes at the front. So they're kind of a nod to the original indicator and side light, which was sort of top and bottom here originally. We're using this as the actual cold air intake for the engine itself. So there's a round spigot on the back of here which matches the size of this one, and there'll be a duct between the two. And then we've essentially got this kind of floating section in the middle which holds a very, very high intensity orange LED indicator unit. The other one, it's just generally cold air feed into this side of the engine bay, which will help shift some of the exhaust heat away from the AC condenser, which would be always welcome. Fuel filler for the other Allegro, George was just finishing that off. He just had the final bits to do on that. And if I hadn't mentioned it already, I may have done, door mirrors are on this car now, which is always a weirdly big transformational thing visually. And then James will probably fill you in on where he's at doing the last bits of leathering on the interior on this, because we're kind of excited to see that lot go in and the interior be finished off. So that's where we're at with that. We'll go this way, Camaro. Gibbo had this on the ramp last week for spanner checking, which is now completed. We're going through finishing off tail end of things. So the 3D printed parts that Luke designed for the instrument cluster that house the warning lights, and also a bracket that retains the instruments, they all came back from 3D print. So Gibbo's been modifying the actual original instrument panel to allow the fitment of those parts. I think he's done that now, so that's going to go through to the body shop to be painted, and that'll be the last piece before we can get that instrument cluster back into place. He's been doing the trim mouldings on the top of the rear quarter cards. We had to fit the little moulding strips that have the inner weather seals on them, and we weren't happy with how they were sitting. There was essentially a rivet in there, but the back part of the rivet was just holding off the way they hook over the frame of the car there. So we were trying to come up with a really nice flush way of doing that. And actually in the end he's just gone nut and bolt as a nice way of, it actually remarkably takes up less space than the back end of the rivets on there. We were initially trying these kind of manually peened over rivets, but they have a habit of just looking messy. They kind of always go slightly to one side and don't quite look right. So nut and bolt, very small, I think like M3 countersunk that sits in flush into the seal. So he's happy with that. So he's sent those for Xylan, so when you see the head of the countersunk on the rubber strip, it's black and doesn't stand out. They're just tackling the bonnet pin part. So the other week we saw Luke trial fitting his machine pins and the bezel that sits on the actual engine bay cowling area. The remaining piece to fit is these top sections that we've got here, so we've just got to drill and sort out suitable fasteners of those into the bonnet. And then Steve's finishing off a little bit of wiring, so the amp wiring. We're just looking at the rear window wiring as well. I think Gibbo's been looking at that because we've got to just wire up the window crank switches. So all four windows on this have got what looks like the original windy cranks, but they're actually switches, so you just push them momentarily one way or the other way to put the window up or down, which is quite a cool little feature. We've done it a few times, previously on, I think, Project Kaiser, maybe both Kaisers, certainly Kaiser 2, I think probably both of them. So that's that. Minor threat. It's come up here from the den. We've done all the bits we needed to do down there on it, and I'm just rattling through a few little bits here. There's an escutcheon that sits around here that wasn't gripping very well into the door skin there. So actually that reminds me of exactly what I was looking at on the Camaro. I knew I'd remember at some point. The wing badges we're trying to spec are just the perfect little plastic clip that will push into the holes to grip the wing badges in, because they originally used these kind of thread-on metal ones, which are just a bit gnarly and dig into the paint, and they look like a bit of a rust creator. So I'm trying to get some plastic grommets that just push in, and then the badges push into them, which is what you find on a lot of cars from kind of like the 80s onwards anyway. And we're looking at the same on this. Again, there's a little spike on this escutcheon, which has like a star washer on the back of it, which I don't really like. And originally I'd put them on with like a double-sided adhesive tape, but it's not really good enough. If you jet wash the car, it kind of saws the tape back off. So we're looking for hopefully the same plastic grommets on that. We've done the softer suspension on this now. That was one of the requests from the customer, so we've gone about 15% softer on the springs on it, which I've now taken for a test drive, and I have to say, for me, it feels spot on. It was probably at the firmer end before. I kind of thought it was acceptable before, obviously, but it was on the firmer end. Now it's kind of not overly firm at all. Kind of typical modern car feel to the suspension now. So yeah, finishing off a few bits on that, and then that'll be ready to hand back. And last but not least, Project Portofino, which we had a great opportunity to see this out in the sun this week, and it's the first time I've really seen it anywhere other than in the paint booth, and it just looks absolutely stunning. It's such a nice colour. It kind of really sums up the overall feel we're going for on this car, which is classy, but with a little bit of a kick, a little bit of a pop, and it's kind of an understated colour, very classy looking. When you get it out in the sun, there's just that kind of pop to the pearl in it, which really sets it apart. So it's going to need to be parked outside in the sun more often. So the reason it was outside is because we were doing the wax oiling on it. So that's now done. Wax oiled all hollow sections down in the quarters, in the doors, anywhere water could collect, any hollow sections you can't get paint to. They've been thoroughly wax oiled, and it's actually nice. It's really hot at the minute, which is really helpful for the wax oiling, because it kind of helps it kind of run out everywhere. What we do is we kind of slightly thin it and then put it in a heat oven that we've got, like a heat oven, like a catering oven, and warm it up really hot so it's really thin and sprayable, and it tends to just capillary down into all the seams. But it helps when it's hot, because the body panel temperature is not too cold, so it doesn't immediately cool it down and kind of stop it in its tracks. So that's done, and then Gibbo's been on with all the latches as the first thing, so bonnet latch fitment, door latches, boot latch, just so we can secure all the panels. He's been trial fitting in the wiper mechanism just to make up the Bundy tubes, I think they're called, so we could get them Xylan coated. He's actually just mocked it up with the original motor, but there will be a new motor going in there eventually. Sleeves run the battery cable through, put the pass-through studs front and back, so this one's similar to the Interceptor. We've got a pass-through stud in the back though on this one, rather than it running around the quarter, because that kind of, well, twofold actually. One, the window goes down into that area at the back, so it means there's less space, but also there's actually a ceiling panel kind of directly under the C-pillar on these, because the fuel tank sits in the rear quarter, and so that's kind of almost open to the elements, that back part. So it has a ceiling baffle in there, which stops, I guess, A, the elements, but also B, the fuel smell from the tanks getting into the cockpit. So there isn't like a clear pass-through for the battery cable there. So we've just used a pass-through stud on the rear bulkhead. There's a little capping piece that runs over that. It's actually very similar to the original routing, I think. Am I right in saying that? I'm having a second guess at myself there, whether the battery cable did. I think it was just the wiring loom routing that originally went that way, because there was definitely like a capping piece that stopped the back seat chafing on something there, and I think we've just repurposed what was the wiring loom one on one side for the battery cable, and then our wiring loom will run the other side. So that's in, yeah, and we've got a massive amount of plating. In fact, sitting in the doorway over there is probably the biggest single collection we've done from our various suppliers. So Coma Plating, who do our zinc nickel plating, East Midlands Coatings, who do the Xylan coating, and BG Penny, who do our powder coating. So there's a huge number of parts there, including the subframes and all the core sort of big steel suspension parts for this, which have all been blasted, zinc metal sprayed and black powder coated. Then there's a massive zinc nickel plated parts, so all of the fasteners for all the suspension parts, things like the actual spindles that the front wheel bearings run on themselves, hubs, a lot of stuff, and then a lot of Xylan as well, which is all of the parts that you don't want the thick build-up of powder coat on, but we also want them to be black. That tends to be what category those parts end up, black Xylan. So huge number of parts, a lot for the Interceptor, a lot for this, and Mark's been beavering away behind the scenes, in fact, doing a huge amount of bead blasting of parts prior to going for those coating processes. And I think when he's back tomorrow, he'll start organising through all those parts, repatriating them, is that the right word, with their labelled bags, and then they'll be scanned back into the storage bins upstairs, and the system, the global workshop system, updated accordingly. So at the moment, all those parts are marked on the system as being with chroma plating or whoever it might be. They're marked as being out with a supplier, and then when they come back, they get scanned in. They're received back from that supplier and then scanned into their parts bins, so we know exactly where they are, what processes have been done, and it basically creates a history of the parts on the system, so we can see with a dated history of this part went to this supplier, it had this process done, it was received on this date, it was put into the bin on this date, and who did it, because it depends on the operative's phone. So they'll be logged into their account, so I can see that, let's say Kelly received the parts into goods in, Mark scanned them into the bin, whatever. It's a really good system because it just means we've got an overall view that we can see on the computer system without necessarily having to go to the parts bins. And then when we do specifically need a part, if it's not there, for instance, we know who last had it, etc. So yeah, we are going to be full on with the rebuild of this. And on that note, I'm going to hand to the CAD Den and see what they've been up to.
Hi guys, welcome back to the procrastination station. That's a joke, we're just not doing any work currently because the power keeps shutting off and on again. But I can still tell you about what we've been up to. So, end of last week, I spent the time patterning the E-type door card. As viewers might know, we had the dash piece come back from KS. So, along with patterning the door cards, I've made some little templates that kind of go along the side of that, and it will provide a cut line for the guys down there to use to then kind of get that fitted nicely to the car. After I did that, Cal mentioned, right, okay, well, we kind of need to start thinking about the rest of the interior, so the idea of door cards came up. I really wanted to do the same process that I did with Churchill, which is make the physical door card backing, put that on the car along with the dash, and then scan it all in situ, because like Churchill, this has certain things where the dash flows into the door shape and the door shape flows further around after that as well. So I wanted to scan everything in situ so I can make sure that when the door is closed, everything lines up nicely and we get a really, really good design. And then after that, so what I did was pattern the door card, then take the door card up here, take a top-down photo of that door card, bring that into CAD, make a CAD version of it, which I can then use the plasma cutter to kind of like check back to reality, which is what you see we have here. And then made some slight tweaks, because obviously when you take a top-down photo, there might be a bit of distortion or warping, which we did have. So I made the tweaks based off of the CAD to reality checker, plasmaed that again, and it was bang on. So now I went ahead and I wrote the machining program so we can get that routed out on the router downstairs when we have a moment to. And then that is the door card backing ready to go. So that was kind of end of last week, and then beginning of this week I went back over to the den and I picked up this because previously I've been doing some work on this side to remake this intake pipe, which the final part is now printing on the printer now. They then bought this airbox which had the dual intake system on it, so I've also been doing some work in terms of creating the second side of that, so that slots on over that like so. Bang on, bang tidy, and then I'm going to drill out the holes afterwards just to make sure that they're definitely going to be in the right place. So either side of that is now done. They are printing. We also needs finished cleaning, but the front intake for the second side, which we didn't have at the beginning of this week, I had the one on the off side which feeds the larger duct into the airbox. And then they bought this, so I made the one for the near side, which I wish could have been the same, but it couldn't because there are some bracketry which goes on about down here, which the other one comes into that space. And it also has a much smaller duct coming off the back of it as well. So I made some tweaks to this, prototyped it, I was there yesterday. Prototype was completely fine, so I've gone ahead and made the final part for it now. I'm literally in the process of just cleaning it up a bit, so I can send it back over to the den. And then also on this one, it had there we are. Again, these are literally hot off the printer, so I haven't cleaned this at all. But they have a little wing nut which sits on top. The client wanted a nicer way of taking that off and on again. So what I've done is I've done a little screw on cap. It's got like a cool little mash up between the Den and the Mercedes logo on the top of it, and then that allows her just to nicely just be able to whip that on and off quite quickly, nice and easily serviceable. And I think that is it for the 500 SEC. So the last thing that I'm going to do is actually move back onto the E-Type to what I was doing yesterday, which is, viewers might remember my mirror design for the E-Type. It was this cool little bladed shape that goes along the door. It follows on from the trim that was originally on the door and is a nod to the original door trim. It follows on from the trim from the windscreen and is a nod to the original door trim, which was kind of like a pointed chrome trim which went from the front to the back of the door. What we've done is shortened that dramatically and made that point into the mirror base. I will ping over Jamie some renders so you guys can have a look as well. I did a version of this design which was kind of the aesthetics and the basic mechanism of moving the mirror about a few months ago now. I picked this back up because I was given a sensor by Cal and he was like, I think this might work for the proximity sensor for the automatic doors. So I have a little play around with incorporating that in. That was an interesting task because there's obviously not a lot of space in that mirror, but got it done. I think it's in a good spot and I think directionally it's going to work perfectly. So that's in, the door open button is now in, and I did a little assembly video as well, which I'll also send over to Jamie to kind of guide anyone in the future who needs to put it together. And I think that is where I'm going to leave it for this week, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, CAD guys. And I'm immediately going to hand over to Nick down at the Den to see what him and also James have been up to this week.
Hello, welcome back to the Den. Thank you very much, Cal. So, first of all, straight to BMW 633 CSI E24. So this was a Middle Eastern market car, specifically Dubai. Customers had it for an awful long time. It's pretty good. I've not had a proper look at it, but we're going to do our inspection on this in due course. The customer spends half his time in Dubai, half in the UK. So he's got cars over there and over here. This car he actually drove back from Dubai to the UK, which has been an interesting journey. I'm not sure when and how he managed to kind of make that journey, but there we go, he's had a good life. So we're going to be doing our inspection on this one with a view to making it a bit more reliable, looking at the fuel injection system, whether we can modernise that, having a look at the mechanicals and maybe a bit of the audio. Interior is in really good nick, paint is in really, really good nick, as you can sort of imagine with a car that's been garaged in warm climates. Porsche, we have rectified running issues on this, which appears to have just been the coil packs. They're quite known for the coil packs cracking and getting water ingress. I think 3 of them, once we got them all out, I think 3 of them were quite badly cracked. So we've put a new set of coil packs on. That's running really well, but it does light up like a Christmas tree when you go to wide open throttle. However, it does run and drive, so we're going to carry on with inspection now. We can complete the inspection and then we can go back to the customer with a full report and rectify those issues. So we'll head straight on inside. The Mercedes, not a huge update on the Mercedes this week. I have been into ITG now, so they've got the original airbox and an original filter, so they're going to pattern up and make a new filter for this. CAD Luke has been busy doing some 3D, I can't remember if these were on last week or if we talked about them. So the donor airbox we've got has 2 inlets, one either side rather than just a single one. So Luke's sort of scanned the front of the car, drawn and printed these prototype intakes so we can have a direct cold air feed. It's unrestricted, then we can run some trunking up to the airbox. That's all coming along really well. James is cracking on with the interior stuff, which he'll talk about, and the brake calipers we've had refurbished, they're back on, they're looking fantastic. Luke's done a really good job of painting those, clear coat, and we actually colour matched the lower panels on this, because this has got two-tone paint. So we colour matched the lower panel just to kind of tie in the calipers, and then we did a nice little Mercedes logo on there because they're matches the round piston on the caliper. So that looks pretty smart. Happy with that. In the detailing bay we have the Mini. It's been waiting patiently to come in to see Chris. You can have a little more look at what Chris has been doing on his own YouTube channel, which is Foxtail Detailing. So go and have a look at that after the end of this video. Don't go yet. This is coming up really, really well. The paint was essentially fine, and it was painted not that long ago. It was just quite badly scuffed, and it had some surface marks and stuff like that. So Chris has been working his magic on that. He is currently just cleaning and coating some under trays from a car that we've got in at the moment, this Mercedes AMG GTR. Quite a modern car for us actually, and a fantastic car. I'm quite a big fan of these, I like them a lot. So a couple of little small complaints the customer's got about the car, so we're just having a quick look at those for him now. This is a car that Chris Fox looks after, so we're having a quick look at that for him to help him out with that. What else have we got? Nothing on the Lupo at the moment. We're just waiting for some bits for that, mainly the bits for the exhaust and the boost pipe as well. It's being fabricated for us at the moment. The Cappuccino, we've been dry fitting the bumpers for this. We've dry fitted these lower panels, which are then obviously going to go off and get painted. And we've just been rectifying some of the bits of bodywork that hadn't been painted. There's a couple of brace bars that have basically been bolted on, and the car had kind of been prepped and painted with them in place, and they were quite rusty and horrible underneath where they join. So we just had those off. We just treated those, and we're going to paint them before we put them back on. And then our Luke has been chatting with the customer about the air intake. So the customer wants to kind of improve performance, but not making it like highly tuned and going mad with it. Still wants that kind of OEM plus feeling with it. So similar to the Golf VR6 we did, Luke's just been looking at the standard airbox. Again, ITG are going to make us a filter for this. And then we've had the front bumper dry fitted, and then we're just looking at the best way of making a cold air feed. So the customer's having a little look at that at the moment, see how he wants to progress with that, but then we can just get some direct cold air feed, and hopefully to give it a little bit more induction noise, although it is turbocharged. We just drilled the bottom of the airbox again, which just gives it a little bit more of a throaty noise, although it'll be a little bit more subdued I think on this because it's turbocharged. So we've done that. We have had the new engine and gearbox in, so there's some bits we need to resolve with that. Customer's been sort of super helpful with all the research and his knowledge with various bits that we've got to swap over, which is excellent. So yes, that's coming on very nicely indeed. The Metro Turbo, MG Metro Turbo, coolest car in the workshop in my opinion. So we have done the inspection on this now. It's basically pretty good. The fact it's been stood since '92, clearly we have to do quite a bit of work to get it roadworthy and back on the road. So we're going to be overhauling the brake system, the fuel system. We're going to be looking at the clutch, kind of perishable items, full service obviously, and we're going to be looking at the cooling system with the hoses, the radiator, alternator starter motor, all those things. The customer wants it on the button, be able to use it. So we've just done the inspection with that in mind. We have sent off the hydroelastic spheres to be serviced. They have a window of availability to be able to do those quickly. So we've sent those off straight away, and then the customer's going to pop up in a couple of weeks, and then we can go through the rest of the car and talk to him and have a plan of action on that. So very excited to be able to get that one going as well. I think that is it from me in the workshop for this week, so I'm going to hand upstairs to James, not Richard, James.
Hi, welcome back to the trim shop. This week it's been a bit of a short week for me. I was on holiday on Friday and Monday, so We have cracked on and finished the Cayman, so Jamie will throw some pictures of that now. So headlining went really well, A-pillars, gear gaiter, handbrake gaiter, and then we changed the pockets where it was carpet before, so we changed that to Alcantara to match. That came out really smart. Brown matches really well with the car, so yeah, really happy with that one. The customer's picked that up, he's happy. So yeah, looks really great, and hopefully we'll see him out at some shows. Then it's been the Barchetta. So this was the carbon panel, so this has been trimmed in the vinyl. This is the very rear section. Ellie's just going to come in soon and machine this carpet on. It's just a bit of to stop the window rubbing, so just protect the window a little bit. A couple of little bits to bind, and then that will go together, and hopefully that will be done today. Allegro, so you saw me starting that last week, so I've done 3 more panels since. These are the end caps, there'll be some buttons in there, so that will all go together really nicely. Happy with how that's coming out so far. This bit was horrible to do. That's the worst thing I've ever trimmed, but we got it out in one, and I think it will look great in. And then yeah, I'm off next week, so I get a break from doing this. So yeah, see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned next week for more exciting action from Retropower and the Den. Bye for now.